scoot up a little bit.
Oh, that's fine. I think we're good here. So let me make sure we're recording as well. Awesome. So one of my best friends, welcome everyone to Toasty Domain Live. I'm your host, Toasty, joined alongside one of my best friends, Eliot Parker. He is a published author, a proud parent of 2 loving and spoiled cats. I read this from your website. He enjoys sports, traveling, reading, and movies when he's not writing. And let me tell you, one of the best writers I've read of this decade. Eliot, thank you so much for coming by the Toasty Domain studio.
Thank you very much for having me. Good to be with you.
Awesome. I'm so glad you were able to come out. We had a little bit of difficulty earlier, but I'm glad you were able to make it out.
Absolutely. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you.
Well, I appreciate you being here. And recently, you came into a lot of praise as you were chosen by Jan Hodson and WOUB Public Radio as one of the top 100 authors to read as part of their Great American Read campaign partnership with PBS. How did that feel? What was that for you as a writer?
Well, a wonderful honor. And it was an interesting story how that happened. I almost didn't answer the phone when it rang because it was a number I didn't recognize. It wasn't a 740 area code, which is typically the area code for Ohio. I think there's also 614 is another area code and 216. There's several area codes in Ohio, but it wasn't an Ohio area code, so I almost didn't answer thinking it was a telemarketer. But I did answer it. And I'm glad I did, and it was a great honor. I love to write. If I never had anything else published or never had another person interested in something that I wrote, I would certainly write. I just feel like that's a part of me. And I don't feel like I write for accolades or attention. But that said, it's very nice when someone acknowledges the work that you're doing and says, that this is really good and I really enjoyed it and we really think that you're one of 100 authors that people need to be reading. So it was a great honor. I was thrilled to be selected, and I appreciate Jan and everybody at WOUB for selecting me. It was a great honor.
And I like what you mentioned there about you don't write for accolades. Even though it is nice to receive awards, that's not the main reason you write. When I got into blogging, one of the biggest pieces of advice that a fellow blogger gave to me was, if you're in it for the attention and the fame and the awards and the recognition, you're in it for the wrong reasons. Does that reflect, I know it reflects on you, but in terms of your content, you seem to stay pretty level-headed. Is that a reflection on your writing?
I think so. I think that, I look at every single writing project that I'm doing. If it's writing, a book like Code for Murder, or if it's something else, it's a new experience every time. And just when you get the sort of self-satisfaction of getting that first draft finished, or just when you get the first shipment of books coming to you from your publisher, it's a wonderful feeling. But then when I sit down to start another project, I have those moments where I feel like I'm starting all over again. That everything that I applied or tried to do in the previous work or the previous book just won't work, or I've got to start all over again with a whole new approach. So I think that's one thing that keeps me level-headed. Everything that I write, I feel like I'm learning something new every single time. And certainly you as a writer develop tricks and you develop your own voice and your own style. And there's a little toolkit you carry with you from project to project. But on the other side of that, every project is different. And a strategy or a technique that you used on this book or that short story may not work with the next book or the next short story. So it's quite humbling as a writer when that moment happens and you realize, oh no, I'm going to have to do something completely different, because it's constantly challenging you, but at the same time it helps you grow, I think, as a writer too.
Okay. Well, congratulations on that. Congratulations on being named one of the top 100 writers of the area by a PBS affiliate. That's got to be incredible. Now, before we begin talking about Code for Murder, so got appreciate the makeshift set, everyone. I want to talk real quickly about Fragile Brilliance, the book that came out before Code for Murder. As you may or may not know, I reviewed it for my blog. I reviewed it on my YouTube channel, and I really enjoyed Fragile Brilliance. It felt like I mentioned, it was a neo-noir in its purest form. It was dark. It was gritty. How did that writing translate into Code for Murder?
I think one of the key ways that it translated into Code for Murder is I kept sort of that dark, gritty feel with Code for Murder. It's not quite as dark as Fragile Brilliance. Code for Murder is not, but I sort of kept that same dynamic and that same style. And really, what helped a lot with Code for Murder is Cleveland and Charleston. Cleveland is where the setting is for Cleveland, Ohio, where the setting is for Code for Murder. Very similar to Charleston. They are old industrial towns. They are old towns in which time has gone on, and 50s, 60s, and 70s. That was the place people went to work, and now that things have changed and industry is gone, that you're kind of left with these hollow shells of communities and cities. And so Charleston and Cleveland very similar. You could be on one block in Charleston, and you're right in the middle of brick streets and shops and restaurants, and you can go 2 blocks over and you're in this really craggy neighborhood where you don't feel very safe. And I feel that's the same way with Cleveland, Ohio. There's a lot of that going on. Plus you have more population in Cleveland, and you've got sort of the more affluent suburbs that kind of buttress the city, and that's where a lot of your athletes and CEOs and people that are more affluent live, and they're coming into town with the people that are there because of economic circumstances. So I think in that regard, that was probably the strongest connection between the 2 books, is that, like Charleston, Cleveland's just a fascinating place to set a story, because you've got so many different socioeconomic factors coming together that make it a great place to have people get murdered and have detectives and homicide investigators try to find out what happened to them.
It's sort of, it almost reminds me of hiking. I have been to Charleston. I've never been to Cleveland, but I have been to Charleston numerous times. And it sort of reminds me of Huntington, like you mentioned, almost like patchwork. When you have areas of different, varying economic situations. So that being said, Code for Murder, I know, was not as dark as Fragile Brilliance. However, it still has its dark moments. So right off the bat, I noticed like your writing style gets off to a quick start. There's little to no waste of time in terms of chapter 1, boom, it's right there. Whatever the main thing happens, and then from there it's piecing together of why, who is behind it, and that sort of thing. Code for Murder, I read this book shortly after Fragile Brilliance, and I really enjoyed it. Still debating as to which one I like better. But Code for Murder, one of Conversations Magazine's top 50 books of 2017, another honor for you. How did that feel whenever you found that call?
That was great. That came totally out of the blue, and it came right before Christmas time that year. And I got this letter, and it looked like, again, it was kind of like with the WUB situation. I got this letter in the mail, and I didn't really recognize it. It looked like a credit card solicitation or junk mail. And I thought, well, I better open it because I'd never seen this before. And it was a letter from Conversations Magazine stating that I had been chosen. So it was a tremendous honor and a great surprise. And I looked at that list of books they had featured, and there were some really top-line authors and some really recognizable names on that list. So to be kind of in the same conversation with some of those writers, I mean, James Patterson was on that list, and Michael Conley was on that list, and there were some others in that list as well. But to be kind of in the same list with those people was a tremendous honor. Really great.
Yeah, that must be a heck of a just seeing, like you mentioned, all those other authors, and you're up there. You're one of them. So your writing, I mean, obviously you've gotten all these accolades. Where does that come from? What is it? Just imagination standard, or is it personal experience? Where does that come from?
I think that I love to, as any writer does, even if you're writing just for yourself, or you're just writing, keeping a journal. Writers by nature are very intuitive, but they're also very perceptive, and they notice things. And they notice things quite frequently. And I think my interest in writing, or my ability to write, has come from a lot of that, just paying attention. I love to be in crowded places and just listen to conversations, listen to the people sitting behind you having an argument, listen to the couple in front of you that's talking about what they're going to do after work, or listen to that cell phone conversation across the way. It's amazing what you can learn about people and language and dialogue and the human experience from that. So that has helped me a great deal being a writer. I think also something that's helped me in terms of writing mystery thriller stories, a place I go for a lot of ideas is small town newspapers. And we're so fortunate today, and I know people that work in newspapers or in the newspaper industry, would shudder at this or shiver at this. We can get so much free content from newspapers online now. Right. And newspapers have kind of adapted to that, and they're making situations where you can get so many free articles, and then you have to pay and that kind of thing. But what I mean to say by that is if let's say a murder happens in Cheyenne, Wyoming, the Cheyenne newspaper is going to cover that murder for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 6 months, all the way until there's a conviction. A murder that happens in New York City or murder that happens in Miami, Florida might get, front page coverage for a day. But as things go on, that's going to be relegated back to page 7A, page 13A, page 14A. But in a small town, newspaper is really going to follow that. And as you kind of follow the trial, and as you follow the murder investigation, which sometimes leads to a trial, or if it's a cold case that remains unsolved, you really get a sense for the town's dynamics. And small towns hold a lot of secrets. And you have multi-generations of families that have inhabited there. You have people who are considered outsiders that are involved. And so watching those dynamics develop and watching reporters talk about and connect those threads of the mother-in-law of the victim used to date the sheriff investigating the case in high school, for example. I saw that in a small-town newspaper once. I was looking out and thought, oh, what an interesting dynamic that would be. But I get a lot of ideas from those small-town newspapers because you can really see how a murder investigation is really, really investigated and how the case unfolds really from start to finish because it gets coverage repeatedly, almost daily, up until the trial and conviction if there is one. So I get a lot of ideas for that and a lot of ideas for how to set up dynamics in a thriller story for that. And I really think, Hunter, that in every great mystery and thriller, you have to let the audience breathe a little bit. You have to let the readers breathe a little bit. And so you've got to work in some kind of an avenue which is connected to the plot, puts the story forward, but at the same time allows the reader to kind of take a step back and kind of take a breath from the investigation and see more about how these characters develop. In Fragile Brilliance that we were talking about, it's Ronan and Ty's relationship. That is a plot thread that is woven into the story, but at the same time it allows opportunities for us to kind of step away as the reader, and even for me as a writer, and kind of look at a different angle of Ronan and Ty's character. And the same is true in Code for Murder. Stacey Tabbitt has the situation where she's got this kind of ne'er-do-well brother that is that's supposedly living with her to take care of her as she recovers from a botched undercover investigation, but he ends up being a freeloader and doesn't do anything, and he's got some emotional problems of his own. But those kinds of storylines allow the reader to kind of catch their breath a little bit. It still propels the story forward, but it's not that never-ending, page after page, pulse-pounding action that readers will tell you will wear them out. If it's page after page and chapter after chapter, they'll get reader fatigue, and they're less likely to, or more likely to, close your book and set it aside.
Absolutely, and that I think translates into not only books, but I can tell you, I've watched TV shows where if it moves too fast, if there's so much going on, I end up turning it off because I'm like, I don't even have, like you said, I need time to breathe. I don't even know who these characters are. I don't know. And that's one thing I like about your writing is, it does get off to a fast start like we talked about, but you do give your readers time to breathe. And sometimes you even incorporate characters who, almost like in a Watson sort of way, ask one of the characters, what's going on here? Can you please explain, almost like the audience, as you read some of these stories. Every now and then you tend to get lost, especially if you're a reader like me, who tends to be not so good with names. Mm-hmm. So it's nice to see that reflected in your book. I want to go back just briefly on what you were talking about in terms of small towns and how those stories it affects everyone. Was that something you saw growing up? Well, I'm not sure where you grew up, but did you see that growing up as a child, and did that affect your imagination as a kid?
Oh, absolutely. I grew up in Charleston, but my dad's family all lived in small-town rural West Virginia. A lot of my dad's family were born and raised, and some of them still live in Monroe County, West Virginia, which has a claim to fame, by the way. Monroe County, you can drive from one end of the county to the next and not run into a stoplight. No traffic lights in the entire county.
Yes.
So if you like to go fast and you like to go around those 2-lane windy roads, head to Monroe County. You can hit it from one end of the county to the next and never run into a stoplight.
Put it on a billboard.
That's exactly
awesome.
Right. So he was from there, and my dad's other side of the family, on his mother's side of the family, were from Mercer County, West Virginia, in a little small unincorporated community called Montcalm, which is kind of in between Princeton and Bluefield, but sort of further south. than those two communities. And so, you know, growing up, we would go visit those places. You know, we would go and go to family reunions and holidays and all kinds of different things. And so, you know, I didn't notice as much as when I was younger, but as I got older and I would hear, you know, my dad talking and hear the relatives talking, you know, these kinds of issues would come up. Well, I saw Jane the other day, and, you know, boy, I tell you, Jane just has not recovered from when such and such happened to her. Do you know that she ended up marrying the so-and-so who was the brother of so-and-so? And it just goes on and on and on. And in terms of that small town family, the connection to my writing is interesting because a lot of those members of my dad's family left this area back in a lot of them were coal miners, and they left the area in the 60s and 70s when the coal mines were going through its first downturn, the first shutdowns. And they went to Cleveland. They went and worked in the steel mills, the shipyards at Lake Erie. They worked at the rubber plant in Akron. They went to Virginia. They moved to Eastern Virginia, went to Norfolk, worked in the shipyards there, went to North Carolina. But what was interesting about that, a lot of them kept their same property here. So when they retired and they left those industries, they moved back. And so it was interesting getting older after they had been here for a while, had gone somewhere else, and then come back to kind of hear those stories. So, you know, a lot of my dad's connections to small town life and him being raised by people who were from small town communities and visiting there certainly impacts, you know, a lot of what I do. And when I think about character and dialogue and how people relate to one another, it's amazing what you can learn just by going to a small town, or if you have people from a small town and just listening to them talk. You see how all the dynamics work and how people get really riled up about certain things, and then they just kind of about other things. And so, you know, small towns really important.
So is that what inspired you as a kid to begin writing, or what was it that as from a young age, what was it that made you decide, I want to be a writer? I want to be a mystery and thriller writer.
The very first time I ever thought that I could really write was in 8th grade, and I went to school when 7 through 9 was still junior high. There was no middle school, and I'm old. High school was 10th through 12th grade, and I was in 8th grade. And in my 8th grade year, we took and I guess they still have this in West Virginia, and I'm pretty sure in Ohio and other states, they have a writing assessment. So we spent most of the year writing different kinds of writing and different kinds of essays, and we took the writing assessment in the spring, and you got a score at the end of the year. But at the awards assembly, at the 8th grade awards assembly, I was given the 8th grade writing award for my work, and that was really the first time at a young age that I really found. And at that time, you know, I was learning how to write, you know, essays and topic sentences and all that, but I was still, you know, keeping a notebook and just writing for fun. And that was really the first time I ever thought, you know, wow, maybe I have some talent at this, and somebody was really interested in something that I had written, or a collection of things that I had written. So that, you know, at a young age, that was really kind of my first sign. Then when I got into college, I went to Marshall, and I was a journalism major, and I had a good friend, Zach, who was an English major, and they wanted to start this creative writing club at Marshall. And I don't know if this is still true now because it's been a long time ago, but to get a charter to be a sanctioned student club, you had to meet so many times, you had to have so many people in your group, and you know, to kind of show the university that this was going to be a legitimate thing, and it's not just going to meet once or twice and then go away. So my friend Zach said, well, I want you to join this club. And I thought, oh, Zach, I'm not really a writer. He said, I don't care. I just need somebody to keep a chair warm. So show up and shut up and sit there. And I said, okay, I did. So that was my junior year of college, and really just a great group of guys. There was and some girls too. There was 12 or 13 of us, I think, in that group. Yeah. And so then I stayed with it in our senior year. And then my senior year, we all agreed as a group at our first meeting in August when the semester started, we were going to send something out for publication. Didn't mean it had to be accepted. Didn't mean it had to be published, but we were going to take that step. And of course,
just sending it out.
Just sending it out there. And this was before Submittable. This was back when in the computer programs, and you had to get the self-addressed stamped envelopes and the big envelopes and mail everything out. So I had written a story, and we kind of talked about it, read parts of it, gave our feedback all year long. And I had sent a story out at the end in the spring, and a little literary journal called Spec at Mary Washington College in Virginia published it. And I didn't find out until that following fall, after we'd all graduated and moved on, that it had gotten published. So that was the second time that I thought, wow, somebody really is interested in reading and publishing what I had written. And it was really from that moment forward that I started looking at writing more seriously and started working on it kind of as a craft exercise more than just something I wanted to do for fun.
Right. And speaking as a fellow writer, I think for me, the best thing about writing is knowing that it doesn't matter how many people read. I think it's just knowing that you have entertained someone, whether it's mystery or essays or comedy or whatever it is. That to me is something. And you actually, at one point, this was going back a few months ago, you gave me some really good advice, because I write a mystery series too on my blog. Just a little, nothing big or anything, just a, small mystery series. And I asked you, because I've got the third story coming up, and I asked you a question about tone. Up to this point, the first and second stories were more light-hearted, sort of cozy mysteries, whodunits and that sort of thing. Well, the third one, I had this idea that, okay, it's going down in the third story. Like, everything is coming to a head, and it's going to be kind of dark in this third one. But is that such a good idea? And you said, yes, go for it. Normally, especially if it's a third book or story in a series, that's normally like the breaking point for a lot of characters. So you gave me some great advice, and for anyone who might be watching or who might see this video later, what advice can you give to up-and-coming mystery writers?
I would say a couple of things. I would say read a lot of mystery or thrillers or both. Read a lot in that genre. Yes, and we have a nice collection back here.
Yes.
Best American Noir of the Century.
This is one of the best collections ever. Seriously, it's fantastic.
Absolutely. Tanya French is wonderful.
Oh, yes.
Fiona Barton, excellent. Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. All of her books are. Yeah, Raymond Chandler, The Big Sleep, which is a book that really influenced me. I read it in college and really influenced me. So read widely in your genre. Read the classics. Read the contemporary. I would also say that as you go down the road of writing mystery and thriller, keep in mind that mystery and thriller readers are very smart, and most of your mystery and thriller readers are well read in that genre.
Yes.
Even if they don't read a lot outside of that genre, they read a lot in that genre, and so they're going to find out pretty quickly if you've got, if you don't have enough red herrings, if your detective or your protagonist, your private investigator, whoever, doesn't seem real. If there's something that doesn't connect with the plot threads in your story, they're gonna pick it up just like that.
Yes.
And they're gonna let you know that you've got a problem with those with those issues. And I don't say that to scare anyone or to be critical, but it's a very attuned, smart audience. I would say there are two audience groups that I think it's very difficult to write for: mystery and thriller and science fiction.
Yes. Because
those readers are so passionate and so devoted to that genre, and they've seen everything and they've read everything in that genre, that they know if they're being led down a path as a reader that's not going to work out in the end. So I would say certainly be in mind of that. And I would also say join a writing group, find a writing community. If there's not one in your community or there's not one in your town that you're aware of, start one. Great places to go to start them are your public libraries. If you want to start one, they'll put out information. Oftentimes, a lot of your public libraries, at least in the West Virginia, Ohio, and Kentucky region, will let you meet for free because they can turn that in on their annual report for community service. So it's not hard to really start one up if you're not a member of one or there's not one in your community. And don't be afraid to take samples of what you're working on for feedback. I'm a member of the Patchwork Writers Group here in Huntington, and there's many times when we're reading and sharing things that we're working on, and that we want different things from the group. Sometimes we just say, you know what, does this catch your attention? Are you bored to death with these first 2 pages? And sometimes it'll be more specific. Do these characters seem like they like each other? Do these characters seem like they're against one another? So I would say those would be the three biggest things. Read a lot in the genre, both the classical and the contemporary. Keep in mind that mystery and thriller readers are very smart, and if you lead them down a straight path, they're going to figure it out. And find a writing group. Find a way that you can, a place where you can share your work. But also, one more thing about the writing groups, they keep you motivated. And if you're somebody like me who has to have a deadline to get anything done, that writing group not necessarily creates a deadline, but it creates accountability. If you meet once a month, like our Patchwork Writers Group does, then I'm working on something that I know, okay, I've got 4 weeks from the time I've read this first thing to make the revisions or make the changes and bring that back for feedback. So it's another way if you need deadlines and accountability. Writing groups are really good for that too.
Yes. Speaking of writing groups, we need to cover something, and this is kind of topical. Recently, Empire Books was bought out by someone. In Huntington, for those who might not know, wherever you watch this, there's a group, like you mentioned, writing group. called Writers Can Read. This is where featured or published authors come and they they read to fellow writers some of the things that they've written or published or that are getting ready to publish, and then it turns into an open mic portion in which amateur and non-published writers can voice things that they've written, essays, poetry, short stories, or anything like that. However, the venue was recently bought out. So and I'm not sure if you know anything up to this point, but if you can you tell us what does this mean for Writers Can Read?
Oh, I'd be happy to. This has been an event, and talk about another event that kind of just comes up organically. This was started by some of the folks that were in the Patchwork Writers Group back in December of 2015, because we felt like we needed an opportunity to bring all writers together, for an opportunity to share their work, to celebrate writing, to celebrate reading. And so we just kind of started at Empire Books, and Carter Seaton, a good friend of mine, kind of helps me. She's my partner in crime, so to speak, with all of this, and does a great job and does a lot of work behind the scenes. But we started this, and so we meet the third Monday of every month at 7 o'clock at Empire Books and News. So we started getting, and there was, this news broke on Facebook first, and then there was a story in the Herald Dispatch about it. And we started getting emails and messages. What's going to happen to Writers Can Read? Is it going to go away? Is it going to move? So Carter and I went down and met with Jared Greer, who is the new owner of the bookstore, and he assured us that he wants Writers Can Read to continue. He wants Writers Can Read to develop and continue to grow. And I think that folks who have been to the store or haven't been to the store for a while are going to be very pleased with the changes that he's going to make. I know, for example, one of the issues that Empire has struggled with in the last couple of years is they shrunk the size of their store. They used to be on the entire first floor there, right as you came into Pullman Square off to the right. Well, in the last couple of years, they halved the store off, brought it up closer to the front, got rid of a lot of the seating areas in the back. Well, that's all going to change. That's going back to a full-size store. That will allow Writers Can Read, for example, to have that space towards the back where we can spread out, we can be more comfortable. We won't be sort of sitting, in linear assembly line style, and that's going to allow also writing groups will be able to meet there, community groups will be able to meet in that space, and so that's just an example of some of the changes I think he plans to employ. But we were concerned that this was going to be the end of Empire. It was going to change into something else, and that Writers Can Read was going to have to relocate. But he encouraged us that he wants that to continue and grow. And, Hunter, I know you've been there and read many times at Writers Can Read. I mean, we started doing this, and there were 6 or 7 people in the audience. It was mostly people we knew. We're up to anywhere from 25 to 50 people each month. We had 54 people at our July 2018 event. I mean, we had people standing in the back of the room because we ran out of chairs. So it's really grown, and the writers we've been able to bring in. I mean, I think people would be really pleased and really impressed with who we brought in and who's coming in the latter half of 2018 and 2019. I mean, these are the kind of writers that you would see if you went to New York, Chicago, went to Thriller Fest or went to Book Expo of America. I mean, these are the kind of writers that are going to be coming as the featured readers. So if folks haven't given us a try yet, not only to read your work and to get some feedback on your work, but to hear some really wonderful writing from published authors, please join us, because it's really, really a great thing.
Right, and it's free.
It's free, absolutely.
It's absolutely free. I mean, so that you really have nothing to lose by going to this. And great, like you said, fantastic writers, and you get to bounce ideas off of each other if you're a writer or a poet or whoever it may be. So, last question, and I don't know how much you can talk about this, but what's next for Eliot Parker?
What's next for Eliot? Well, Eliot Parker is finishing the final edits of the sequel to Fragile Brilliance, called A Knife's Edge.
Yeah,
I knew you would be excited.
Yeah.
I saved that secret for you because I knew you would be excited.
Thank you. I'm going to read that to death.
It will be out. It's called A Knife's Edge. It will be out in right now. February of 2019 is the release date. It will actually be done and out. The ARC copies, advanced reader copies, will go out probably next month into October. But in terms of it being available widespread, it'll be early 2019. But it was great. I've never done a series before, so it was great to go back and work with Ronan again, and Ty, and all the characters that were from the first book came back in the second book. And it picks up 6 months after the end of where Fragile Brilliance leaves off.
Okay.
And a lot of what happens in Fragile Brilliance still has a lingering effect on what's happening in the present. and it starts out with a murder, and there's a high body count like there was in Fragile Brilliance, and a lot of red herrings and twisted threads. But I'm real excited about it. It was, I'd never done a series before. It was a challenge to do, and it took me a long time to get it right. Mainly because you want those characters to have certain core characteristics that readers identify with, but you also want to show them growing. You don't want them to be exactly the same in every phase and facet in book 2 that they were in book 1. So getting that growth right, making it legitimate and incremental, not too not too far to where a reader would say, wait a minute, that doesn't sound like him, or that's not something he would do, was a challenge. So it took a long time to get it right, but I'm real proud of it, and I think readers, if you enjoyed Fragile Brilliance, I think you'll love A Knife's Edge, because everything about Fragile Brilliance in terms of pacing and plotting is there, but we do see our characters grow a little bit, and they're not quite the same at the end of A Knife's Edge as they were at the end of Fragile Brilliance. So I think readers will like that too. They'll see some growth and change in some of those characters.
Awesome. Yes, I'm so glad. I can't wait to read that when it comes out in perfect timing too, because I love, for me, the 2 best seasons to read mystery thrillers are fall and winter.
Absolutely.
That's the darkest, coldest time of the season. So that will come out, like you mentioned, as of right now in early 2019. In the meantime, Code for Murder is out right now. I have a physical copy, but where can viewers, someone who might see this, where can they find a copy of this book?
Sure, they can get a copy anywhere you like to get books. Certainly, I would encourage, and I know Hunter would as well. Visit your local independent bookstore if you have one in your community, because that's so important to support those businesses, because those businesses are our neighbors. People that work there are our neighbors, and that money stays locally in your community. But if your independent bookstore can't get it or won't get it for whatever reason, you can certainly get it on Amazon. You can get it at Barnes & Noble and Books A Million, and nationwide. You can get them online. Really anywhere you like to buy books, you can get it. You can also visit my website, eliotparker.com, and I have pictures of the books, and those will take you to those links I just talked about, where you can order it from my website too as well. So really anywhere you like to buy books, it's in an ebook. For your Kindle, for your Nook, for your iPad, for whatever it is that you like, that electronic reading device, you can get it there as well.
Okay, fantastic. Anything else you'd like to add before we sign off?
I don't know. I hope I didn't talk too much.
No, I talk. No, this is like it's a talk show. You talk.
I've been over here flapping my gums for probably a half an hour, and I thought, I hope I haven't talked too much.
And I appreciate that. I really do. Thank you so much for being on the show and being on the podcast. Anyone out there, if you're watching it live, thank you for tuning in. And if you're not watching it live and you're just watching the post recording, feel free to subscribe to the YouTube channel. That way you'll know when the next live streams will be. I think I'm going to try to turn this into a monthly thing in which we bring mostly writers, but maybe diverge from now and then to maybe like musicians or filmmakers or whoever it may be. But yeah, so please subscribe, do all that YouTube social media stuff. So Eliot, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks,
I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.
And thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you next time.